In the early morning darkness of April 26, 2000, a frightened young woman was found wandering on the tarmac of Reno Tahoe International Airport. When airport security confronted her, she claimed she was searching for her younger sister who had run loose on the runway, a sister that, in reality, she didn't have. That woman was 25-year-old Star Palumbo, and within hours she would vanish without a trace. The next day, Star's car was discovered abandoned at the airport, loaded with her belongings, but with no sign of Star herself. Her abandoned vehicle held clues as eerie as they were baffling, cryptic letters and an ominous sketch that hinted at her growing paranoia, yet nothing that gave a clear answer to her fate. The bizarre circumstances, from Star's incoherent airport encounter to the unsettling contents of her car, have made her disappearance one of Nevada's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Star Palumbo was a 25-year-old from Tucson, Arizona. In 1999, she moved to Reno, Nevada to live with her grandmother. By all accounts, Star had a happy upbringing and was known to be friendly and trusting. Friends and family would later say she might have trusted people too much, a trait that could put her at risk. In Reno, she worked at a pawn shop, but she also fell into using meth, and soon her drug habit spun out of control. Investigators believe she may have turned to escorting as a way to fund her addiction. Despite these troubles, Star stayed in touch with her family, and she spoke to her mother regularly on the phone. But on April 25th, 2000, the day before she vanished, Star sounded unusually anxious and paranoid. She told her mother that she thought someone was following her and that her phone was tapped. She even talked about coming home to Tucson to start over. It was the last time her family ever heard from her. Just hours after that distressing phone call, Star's strange behavior came to a head. Shortly after midnight on April 26th, an airport police officer found Star trespassing in a restricted area of the Reno airport. She was disoriented, cowering behind a truck on the tarmac. When questioned, Star claimed she was looking for a younger sister who had run onto the runway, even though Star didn't have a sister in real life. Recognizing that she was not well but had committed no serious crime, the officer decided not to arrest her. Instead, he gave Star a ride to the nearby Reno Hilton Hotel so she could safely spend the rest of the night. Unfortunately, this act of leniency by the cop would be the worst thing that could have happened to Star. The Reno Hilton Hotel was the last place Star was seen. The officer dropped her off there around 1:30 that morning, and a valet reportedly saw her near the entrance shortly afterward. However, Star never checked into the Hilton or any other hotel that night, and after that brief sighting by the valet, she vanished without a trace. In the pre-dawn darkness, Star Palumbo effectively stepped off the face of the earth. On April 27th, Star's vehicle was found illegally parked and abandoned at the airport. The car, registered in her name, was packed with her personal possessions, including her purse with $600 cash inside and her cell phone. These are items she almost certainly would have taken with her if she were leaving intentionally. Even more disturbing were the other things police discovered in the car. There were printed copies of 3 emails Star had sent to the White House claiming the federal government was after her. There was also a hand-drawn sketch of a woman resembling Star in a compromising position, and 2 books about how to change one's identity. To investigators, the contents of Star's car read like something out of a thriller, an unnerving mix of paranoia and possible plans for a getaway. Star never returned to claim her car or any of the items inside it. These clues painted a picture of a young woman in an extremely fearful state of mind, and possibly preparing to flee from a danger which she perceived to be real. Investigators were left to wonder whether Star had suffered a breakdown and become lost, or if someone she feared had caught up with her. Either way, the items left behind only deepened the mystery instead of solving it. They showed that Starr was deeply afraid of something or someone, whether it was a genuine danger or a figment of her imagination. After Starr disappeared, her parents put up flyers and alerted the media around Reno in hopes of finding her. For months, there were no leads, and then, 8 months later, a startling tip emerged. In December 2000, the owner of the Silver Dollar Casino in Elko, Nevada, reported that a frightened young woman matching Starr's description had come into her bar one night. This distressed woman said her name was Starr and claimed she was trying to escape from a pimp. At one point, she noticed a man peering through the window as if looking for her, which caused her to panic and flee the casino with another woman before police could arrive. Authorities investigated this report, but couldn't confirm if the woman in Elko was really Starr Palumbo. If it was her, it suggests Starr was on the run from dangerous people after she went missing. If not, then her trail truly went cold in Reno. Aside from that one unconfirmed incident, no other trace of Starr has ever surfaced. Over the years, several theories have emerged to explain her fate. Investigators generally focus on two broad possibilities: that she had a drug-fueled mental breakdown, or that she met with foul play. One theory is that Starr experienced a severe psychotic break due to her substance use and mounting paranoia, which may have been overlaid upon pre-existing mental health issues. In this scenario, she might have wandered off in a confused state and succumbed to the elements or an accident, with her remains never found. The bizarre behavior she exhibited at the airport, hallucinating about a non-existent sister, supports the idea that she was not in her right mind that night. It's possible she could have ended up far from Reno, unidentified and living transiently due to her impaired mental state. However, after so many years with no confirmed sightings or contact, this outcome is considered less likely. The other leading theory is that someone harmed Starr. Given her involvement with street pharmaceuticals, and given the fact she was likely working in a dangerous position, she was living a high-risk lifestyle that could have led to violence. No official suspects have ever been named in her case, but perhaps she crossed the wrong person. Maybe a drug dealer she owed money, or a pimp she tried to leave. One rumor even suggested that Starr overdosed, and acquaintances hid her body in the desert to avoid trouble, though no evidence backs up that story. The potential Elko sighting adds weight to the foul play angle. If that truly was Starr claiming a pimp was after her, it implies she might have been captured or trafficked by dangerous individuals. She could have been forced into working in this seedy industry and then slain when she attempted to escape. Unfortunately, without concrete evidence, all of this remains speculation. Some have also wondered if Starr deliberately disappeared to start a new life under a different identity. The fact that she owned books on changing identities suggests she considered the idea of going into hiding. It's conceivable she felt so threatened that she staged her own disappearance. However, this theory is difficult to square with the evidence. Starr left behind a significant amount of cash and her phone, things one would expect her to take if she were planning to run away. That said, if she was so into the idea of making a clean break, leaving behind $600, and her phone may have just been the cost of doing business, so to speak. She also never reached out to her family again, which would be uncharacteristic if she had the freedom to do so. Most investigators view this as the least likely scenario, though it remains a popular idea amongst some online sleuths. Starr's disappearance received some attention in the media and was even featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries in 2001, yet no answers were uncovered. Supporters later set up a Facebook page to keep her case in the public eye, and local news outlets have periodically revisited the story to remind people that Starr is still missing. Today, Star Palumbo is still officially listed as an endangered missing person. The Reno Police Department remains open to any new tips, emphasizing that even a small piece of information could break the case after all these years. On a warm night in the spring of 1974, a notorious attorney climbed aboard a boat in the Mexican port of Mazatlan and vanished into thin air. The man was Oscar Zeta Acosta, a radical lawyer, writer, and to some, a folk hero who lived as large as the legends he inspired. His disappearance would go down as one of the era's great unsolved mysteries. This isn't a plot from a Hunter S. Thompson novel, but the real fate of Thompson's close friend, the very man who inspired the infamous Dr. Gonzo character. When Acosta disappeared that May, it left a mystery as outlandish as the man himself. He was a man of many contradictions, a crusading lawyer who partied with outlaws, a revolutionary who reveled in chaos, which makes his fate all the more perplexing. Decades later, people are still captivated by the question, what really happened to Oscar Acosta? Born in El Paso, Texas in 1935, Acosta grew up in a Mexican-American family and served a stint in the U.S. Air Force as a young man. He then put himself through college and law school, becoming the first in his family to earn a degree before embarking on what could only be described as an unconventional legal career. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, he fought tirelessly for Mexican-American rights as a young lawyer in East Los Angeles. He quickly gained notoriety for defending the voiceless and clashing with authorities in the streets and in court. He became known for unorthodox courtroom tactics. At one point, he even subpoenaed an entire county grand jury to prove bias against Mexican Americans. Acosta's disregard for legal decorum was legendary. He once strode into court barefoot, insisting his casual attire was appropriate for the courtroom. His booming personality both inspired his community and unnerved the establishment. By all accounts, he seemed to have little fear of consequences. Thompson even noted that Acosta carried a conviction that he would die young, which only fueled his audacity. In 1970, Acosta ran for Los Angeles County Sheriff on a radical platform. He lost that race, but not before earning over 100,000 protest votes. Acosta also achieved a form of pop culture immortality through his friendship with gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson. The two shared outrageous escapades, most famously a drug-fueled trip to Las Vegas that Thompson later immortalized in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. In that book, Acosta appears thinly disguised as the character Dr. Gonzo, a chaotic 300-pound Samoan attorney. Acosta resented being fictionalized this way and initially threatened to sue Thompson over the portrayal. He settled, agreeing not to sue if Random House put a photo of him and Thompson on the book's back cover and gave Acosta a 2-book deal of his own. This memorable portrayal made Acosta notorious in counterculture lore, even if it exaggerated and obscured the real man behind the alias. By early 1974, Acosta's life was careening on the edge. He had published his second book by that point, but was increasingly consumed by a cocktail of drugs. Perhaps seeking a new thrill or escape, he headed to Mexico that spring, a trip from which he never returned. In May 1974, at age 39, he traveled to Mazatlan, Mexico, and promptly vanished under really bizarre circumstances. His last known contact was a phone call to his son, in which he cryptically said he was about to board a boat full of white snow, likely meaning a vessel loaded with Colombian confetti. What happened after that call remains a mystery. Acosta never returned from the trip, and no trace of him was ever found. His stunned family and friends could do little but notify authorities and hope for news. Mexican police had few leads, and the case quickly went cold. For a man who had thumbed his nose at danger, the idea that he could simply disappear overnight was almost unbelievable, and yet that is exactly what happened. Over the years, rumors swirled, and no one was really sure if Oscar was alive or dead. Finally, in December 1986, a California court declared him legally deceased in absentia. This was an act done so that his family could move on with cleaning up his estate and other legal matters, and wasn't an acknowledgement that he was factually deceased. In essence, it was a bureaucratic formality that provided no real answers, and the question of his fate remains unanswered to this day. One of the people determined to find answers was Hunter S. Thompson. In 1977, Thompson penned an investigative story for Rolling Stone titled "The Banshee Screams for Buffalo Meat," a gonzo obituary of his missing friend. Based on his digging and gut instincts, Thompson floated two chief possibilities. Either Acosta was slain by drug dealers during that Mexican trip, or he was the victim of a politically motivated hit. The first theory is bolstered by Acosta's own ominous last phone call and the risky drug scene he was very apparently mixed up in. Even Acosta's son Marco believed his father probably angered someone dangerous and got himself slain in a fight on that boat full of contraband. Acosta wasn't a guy who was known for his calm and cool demeanor, nor was he one to stand down for virtually anything. Further, he was also known to be someone who stood up for others, often even to the point of his own detriment. It's not difficult to imagine how he could have seen some real bad things going down on that coke-fueled boat ride that just flat out pissed him off. The second theory points to Acosta's many political enemies. After all, he had loudly challenged police brutality and corruption in Los Angeles for years, so it's conceivable that someone he angered might have arranged to silence him. In the end, Thompson's remembrance of Acosta was equal parts fond and scathing. He described his friend as a virtually paradoxical person. On the one hand, he was a brilliant genius who wasn't afraid of anything, and on the other hand, he was a flat-out crazy troublemaker. In fact, Oscar Zeta Acosta is in essence a textbook example of a chaotic good sort of person. These sort of people act in accordance to their conscience and values, but reject rules, laws, and institutions they see as oppressive or corrupt. That fits Acosta to a T, and he frequently clashed with judges, law enforcement, and even his allies and friends, showing disdain for convention. In essence, he was a disruptive force for justice, and either of the scenarios proposed by Hunter S. Thompson are indicative of how his personality may have gotten him eliminated. Other explanations have been proposed as well. Perhaps Acosta fell victim to his own excesses. He could have overdosed and wandered off into the wilderness to die. Or perhaps he OD'd on the boat and was just tossed over, never to be seen again. Some even wonder if he had a total mental collapse and purposely vanished, deciding never to return to society, at least in the United States. With no physical evidence or remains, we may never know for sure what happened to Oscar Zeta Acosta, but if foul play was involved, it was effectively covered up. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, and if you're a regular, you know that I'm going to ask you to click that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. This is the best way to help out my channel in the algorithm, and it ensures that I'll continue to produce content for years to come. Also, don't forget to check out my podcast, Lazy Chill True Crime, by searching wherever you get your podcasts. There's content from this channel, my Solved True Crime channel, and even some bonus stuff you're not going to hear or see anywhere else. In the blistering heat of the Central Australian desert, a man lies dying in a remote cave. Harold Lassiter is starving, his eyes blinded by sand and sun, scratching final lines into his diary. He had claimed to have found a fortune in gold, a motherlode so rich it could make a nation wealthy. Yet in his last agonizing hours, he would have traded that entire bounty for a single loaf of bread and a cup of water. This is the tragic and tantalizing tale of Lassiter's Reef, a mystery that has haunted the Australian outback for nearly a century. Lassiter's Reef is perhaps Australia's most famous lost treasure legend. The story has all the ingredients of an epic: an outback drifter's claim of an impossibly rich gold deposit, a grand expedition into uncharted desert, and a desperate final journey that cost a man his life. Harold Lassiter perished in 1931 without ever proving his golden find, but his story did not die with him. Instead, the legend of a hidden reef of gold took on a life of its own, luring fortune hunters and sparking debate for decades to come. In 1929, amid the Great Depression, Lassiter came forward with a bold proclamation. Years earlier, he insisted he had discovered a quote-unquote vast gold-bearing reef somewhere in Central Australia. If you can't tell, I'm not an Aussie, but a reef is a vein of valuable minerals or metals. I'm not sure if this is an old-timey word or if it's still popular in Australia these days, so let me know in the comments if you're from the former Habsburg holdings down under. Funny story, just a quick aside, but the confusion between Austria and Australia will never not be funny to me. Years ago, I had a very bizarre dream that was inspired by this mix-up. Let's just say it featured a giant koala in a eucalyptus leaf dirndl, a man who looked suspiciously like the late great Steve Irwin dressed up in lederhosen, and the most surreal waltz ever. But yeah, let's get back on script. Harold wrote to a federal politician describing a huge gold deposit out in the desert, reportedly stretching for miles and incredibly rich in ore. According to this letter, he had found the site around 1911, but lacked the means to develop it at the time. Government officials were dubious, especially when they learned Lassiter had been living on a farm during the period he claimed to be prospecting, and they ultimately dismissed his story. Undeterred by this setback, Lassiter tried again in early 1930. He approached John Bailey of the Australian Workers' Union and spun his tale anew, this time claiming the discovery had actually occurred 33 years earlier, when he was just 17. In this version, Lassiter said his horses had died during a trek across the interior, and that he'd been rescued by a surveyor named Harding, who let him in on a wee golden secret. Such inconsistencies in Lassiter's story raised eyebrows even then. Nevertheless, the lure of a colossal gold strike during hard times proved irresistible. By mid-1930, a syndicate of investors had agreed to fund an expedition to search for Lassiter's Reef. The expedition that set out from Alice Springs in July 1930 was lavishly equipped for its day, complete with motor vehicles and even a small airplane for aerial scouting. The team included seasoned bushman Fred Blakely as leader and Lassiter as guide, along with a handful of other men eager to find the treasure. It wasn't long before reality set in. The desert proved punishing. Trucks bogged in sand and broke down, the airplane crashed, and their radio failed, cutting off contact. As weeks passed with no trace of the gold reef, the crew's confidence in Lassiter plummeted. The guide's behavior grew peculiar. He was sullen and uncooperative, often singing hymns or writing in his diary instead of helping navigate. Eventually, expedition leader Blakely decided that Lassiter's supposed reef was a wild goose chase. Fed up, he accused Lassiter of fraud and elected to quit the search and turn back. By September 1930, the main party had abandoned the mission, effectively stranding Lassiter in the wilderness. Lassiter, however, refused to quit. Determined to find the reef on his own, he joined with a camel handler named Paul Johns and pressed onward into even more remote territory. They trekked through rugged country as Lassiter directed them based on his memory. One day, Lassiter returned to their camp jubilant, showing Johns a chunk of quartz veined with gold, proof, he claimed, that he'd rediscovered the rich reef. But he stubbornly refused to reveal the exact location, which only deepened Johns's suspicions. The two men fell into a heated argument and even came to blows. Finally, Johns, now convinced the reef was nothing but a fantasy, took the remaining camels and left Lassiter behind to fend for himself. Now completely alone with the exception of a couple of single-humped camels, Lassiter pushed onward on foot. Fate dealt one more cruel blow when his last two single-humpers bolted, carrying off most of his supplies. Stranded without food or water, he wandered the desert in dire straits until a group of nomadic Aboriginal people discovered him and shared what little they had. Their kindness kept Lassiter alive for several more weeks. During that time, according to entries later found in his diary, Lassiter claimed to have sighted the gold reef yet again, and even to have pegged a claim on it for his backers. But his physical condition was rapidly worsening, and he was nearly blind, malnourished, and unable to continue on. Harold Lassiter finally succumbed to starvation and exhaustion in late January 1931, alone in the vast emptiness of the interior. When Lassiter failed to return, his backers organized a search party. In March 1931, Bushman Bob Buck found Lassiter's remains near the border of Western Australia and the Northern Territory. Local Aboriginal people had given the dead man a rudimentary burial, laying his body in a shallow grave. This took some time for him to find, and to paraphrase Norm MacDonald, perhaps Buck could have shortened the search by hitting up all the shallow graves first. Buck duly reinterred Lassiter's remains, and later had them moved to a cemetery in Alice Springs. Nearby, Buck found a cave containing Lassiter's personal effects, including his journal and some letters. From these, the final pieces of the story emerged in Lassiter's own words. He described the camels running off, the assistance he received from indigenous companions, and his last futile trek toward civilization. Crucially, Lassiter's diary also asserted that he had indeed found the reef again, and had drawn a rough map to its location, which he hid in his kit bag under a sand dune. Years later, an expedition did dig up that buried kit bag, only to find the map inside had disintegrated to dust. With that, any final clue to the reef's location was lost to the elements. No firm evidence of Lassiter's reef was ever produced, yet the tale only grew in the telling. Over subsequent decades, it attained mythic status, perhaps the greatest lost mine legend in Australia. During the Depression era, the story of a hidden mountain of gold in the outback captured the public's imagination. Popular accounts of the saga made their way to print, and in these retellings the legend grew a bit each time. Some versions of the tale even claim that Lassiter didn't perish at the end, but that he actually ended up fleeing to America. In this version of events, he essentially realized the grift was up and got out, while the getting out was good. However, there's no evidence to prove this was the case, and everything seems to run against it. Harold Lassiter's life story reads more like that of a real-life Captain Ahab, rather than a grifter trying to make a buck. Despite the skeptics, the legend refuses to die, and the tantalizing possibility of a fortune in undiscovered gold continues to beckon adventurers into the desert even today. By some counts, at least a dozen full-on expeditions have tried, and failed, to locate Lassiter's reef over the years. Numerous lesser expeditions have also been carried out as well. Lassiter's own son, Bob, was among those who caught the gold bug fever. Bob Lassiter spent decades mounting some 30 searches of various sizes, to redeem his father's name and secure that bag, or reef in this case. Reading Harold's diary had made him a firm believer that the reef was real. He believed his father had been betrayed by the expedition and never given a fair chance to reveal the reef's location. To his dying day, Bob maintained that his father had been telling the truth. The fact that his son was so dedicated to finding the reef as well has led many to believe that Harold was at worst delusional, but not a grifter like some have claimed. But to be fair, Bob Lassiter didn't acquire a case of intergenerational Captain Ahabism from dear old dad. Rather, he's a guy who just loved his dad and wanted the world to see that his father wasn't some sort of grifter. Today, nearly a century later, the mystery of Lassiter's Reef remains unsolved and as intriguing as ever. No one has confirmed the existence of Harold Lassiter's legendary gold, yet his name is firmly etched into Australia's outback lore. The cave where Lassiter sheltered in his final days now bears a plaque in his memory, and an incredibly desolate 150-mile highway, deep in the outback, bears his name. In the late 15th century, a quiet convent in Germany became the unlikely epicenter of a bizarre outbreak. It began with a single nun who, without apparent reason, felt an irresistible urge to bite her fellow sisters. This nun lunged and bit one companion after another, and before long the strange impulse had spread. Soon every nun in that convent was caught up in a frenzy of biting. The contagion didn't stop at the convent's walls. As word of the biting nuns spread through the region, other nuns in other convents began exhibiting the same startling behavior, almost as if the very idea were infectious. According to later accounts, news of the initial incident passed throughout Germany, before working its way into other regions. From there, the biting mania then jumped to neighboring countries, even reaching as far away as Rome. In the superstitious climate of the late Middle Ages, the immediate assumption was often supernatural. Many concluded that the nuns must have been possessed by demons or some sort of spiritual affliction. Priests reasoned that if the cause was not an obvious physical illness, it had to be the work of the devil and his minions. The convents convened special prayers and masses, imploring divine help for the afflicted sisters. When prayer alone failed to calm the biting frenzy, the church escalated to exorcisms. These formal rituals were intended to cast out evil spirits that they believed were prompting the nuns to behave like wild animals. These religious remedies, however, had no effect on the outbreak. According to much later tellings, the attempts to exorcise the so-called demons only made matters worse by intensifying the nuns' own fear. Hearing that the devil might be loose among them sent the most impressionable sisters into panic, so that they too felt the urge to bite. In essence, the very belief that they were bewitched helped the contagion spread even faster. With exorcisms failing and the biting epidemic only growing, the secular authorities decided to intervene with more direct measures. Local officials and physicians were called in to stop the madness before it spread further. They abandoned any supernatural explanation and addressed the situation in the most literal way possible. The nuns were firmly told that there was nothing demonic happening, and that the compulsion to bite was not a curse, but a figment of their own imagination. What could have caused such an outbreak in the first place? With the benefit of hindsight, modern scholars classify the biting nuns episode as a classic case of mass hysteria, or what today might be termed mass psychogenic illness. In essence, this means there was no physical pathogen. It was a psychological phenomenon in which mental stress and suggestion led to real physical actions. Mass hysterias tend to occur in places where tightly bound groups of people live under pressure, and medieval convents fit the bill exactly. At that time, Many young women were forced by their families to enter convent life. Once inside, they had to endure an austere existence that demanded constant obedience, poverty, and long hours of labor and study. These nuns lived cloistered from the world in what were essentially communal, high-stress conditions, not of their own choosing. It's not hard to imagine the psychological strain this could create on these women. Frustrations and fears would build up in such an environment, even if unspoken. We know today that such pent-up stress can sometimes find unusual outlets. In the terminology of modern psychology, the nuns may have been experiencing a conversion disorder. This is when an emotional or psychological conflict is unconsciously converted into unusual physical behavior, in this case, compulsive biting. But here, there's also the element of mass psychogenic illness, indicating that this spread throughout these very tight-knit and isolated communities. Notably, in an interesting twist, there is a further mystery associated with the biting nuns that isn't often discussed. It's very possible the story of the biting nuns was exaggerated or even invented. There's no solid contemporary evidence, no surviving convent records, and most accounts come from much later writers who summarize sources that are now lost to us. That said, the main source which is cited for the biting nuns case is Justus Hecker, a highly respected 19th century German physician. Given his stellar reputation, historians of medicine generally believe that he was legitimately working with sources that are now simply lost in the two intervening centuries.